Okay, we're live. We're going live. I think we're live. Let's see here. Make sure everybody can hear me. How are you, everyone? Okay, we're going to go to that microphone because I think that microphone would be better. Chuck Holton here. I'm up in the mountains of Panama. Good morning. Where's everybody coming in from? I am coming on a little early this morning because we've got some things to do, and Connie and I are trying to have a getaway up here in the mountains of Panama. This place is amazing. I will show you very quickly what it looks like because it's worth seeing. So I'll pick my computer up here and go over and show you the view. This is Boquete, one of the highest places in Panama, and it is absolutely gorgeous. Just incredible. We're up here watching the birds this morning, having a cup of coffee, and it's nice and cool up here. It's probably, I don't know, 65 degrees or something. Just amazing. So nice. So got people from Florida, Australia, Oregon, all over the place. That's great. Well, thank you for being here. Panama is a beautiful place, and that's one of the reasons I like living here, even though I don't get to be here very much. Norway, that's another beautiful place. I've been to Norway once. Typically, you have to have a war for me to show up, but we did get to go to Norway one time to do some reporting on the migrant issue up there. That was interesting. Okay, so let's talk about Iran. And the title of this thing is War with Iran. The case I want to make here is that we are at war with Iran already, but that it looks a little different than what you might think because war, well, every war is going to have its own flavor. That's one thing that I've learned about, as I've covered wars around the world, is that every war has its own flavor. It has its own unique set of risks. It has its own, wars evolve. And so one of the problems with fighting a war is that they say the generals are always fighting the last war and not this war. And it's very difficult not to do that because the only thing the generals have to go on is what happened last time. And so, the war in Ukraine was much different than the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example. And the war that we see in Israel is much different from the war in Ukraine. There are so many factors that affect wars, and this one's no different. But I want to make the case for the fact that I believe that we are already at war with Iran. The easiest way to make that case is just to say Iran has already declared war against us. And if one of the parties is at war with the other, then war exists. And we can try to pretend that it doesn't exist. We can try to minimize it. We can try to ignore it. But all that means is that we will lose the war, because if our adversary or our enemy is committed to fighting us, then we're at war. And that's exactly where we are with Iran. Now, let's talk about what's been happening in the war with the United States. I mean, there's a whole lot here to go through. And so I'm going to try to sort of sum it up first, and then I'll go back and fill it in somewhat. First of all, you have these, so Iran has chosen to make use of proxies when fighting its war with the United States in order to try to put some distance between themselves and the U.S. military. And they want to have deniability. They want to be able to say, we're not really fighting the United States. That's those guys over there. It's the Houthis. But we know that they are supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And without a doubt, they are supporting the Iranian-backed militias. They've been known by many names, provisional military units, the PMUs, the Hashishabi, Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq and Syria. Those strikes that have been made against U.S. forces. So, for example, we've got something like 9,000 troops in Iraq and Syria. And they're mostly spread around on small bases, and they're there to keep a lid on the remainders of ISIS, because ISIS still exists as an organization. We have hammered them into dust in a lot of places, like Raqqa and most of the eastern third of Syria and northern Iraq, Mosul, places like that. We drove them out of there as an organized, cohesive military. But the guys who made up that military are still around. And they're still extremists, and they still want to kill us and everybody else. They just, you know, that's what ISIS does. They just kill everybody. So if you want to know Ray, for example, Ray Taylor's asking, why are we still in Iraq? I can understand why you would say that, because it seems like, is there even still a war in Iraq? Actually, there is. You just don't hear about it. The war that's in Iraq is still going on against ISIS. ISIS is striking targets in Iraq, not just American targets. But so the reason that we have troops there is to try to keep a lid on that, to keep them from being able to reorganize into a cohesive fighting force and start taking territory again. Because the last time that happened, it cost hundreds of thousands of lives. About 70,000 Iraqi troops died. About 12,000 Kurdish troops died, 12 to 15,000. And lots and lots of civilians, I mean, millions of civilians were displaced by ISIS the last time that they tried to take territory. You remember, not that long ago, ISIS held enough territory, more territory than the United Kingdom, than Great Britain, across Syria and Iraq. They pushed all the way to within 4 kilometers of the airport in Baghdad. So, and they had something like 70,000 troops at the height, maybe more, I don't know. But now they're scattered, they're hunted, and more than 10,000 of them are actually in prison or in prison camps across Syria. And so I like how Ray says, we are broke. We are running on fumes. We have no money. We are broke. That is absolutely correct. Pretty much everything the United States does is being done on a Chinese credit card. And so you could make the case that the United States doesn't have any business trying to influence these things by sending our people or our money elsewhere. But I covered this yesterday in the live that I did on my own channel, that the other option, either we spend money and treasure and time and resources and even people in these places around the world trying to keep a lid on things, or we just let everything run amok. We just pull back into the United States. We let the whole world go to heck in a handbasket. And we let our adversaries like Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, and people like that, fill the vacuum that we leave by not being involved. So that's not a good option either, I would submit. And if that's not a good option, if we don't want Russia and Iran and China setting the rules of the global geopolitical game, then we do have to do something about it. Okay, we do have to be engaged in the greater world. And so if we want to have a continued presence, that's going to cost money. It's going to cost time. And I think what the Biden administration is trying to do is they're trying to, and indeed what the Trump administration tried to do, is to have the biggest impact with the smallest footprint possible. So rather than having 100,000 troops in Iraq and Syria, we've got less than 10,000 troops in Iraq and Syria. We've got about 45,000 total troops across the Middle East. We have troops in Jordan. We have troops in Israel. Did you know there's a U.S. military base in Israel? Most people don't know that. We have troops in Qatar. We have troops in the UAE. We have troops, all over. Dubai. Djibouti, not Dubai. We have troops in Djibouti. So our troops are all there to try to continue to have an impact, to have some say in what goes on there. And especially in Iraq and Syria, that comes down to trying to manage what's left of ISIS and the other extremist forces in the region, right? So that's going to be, if we're going to do that, it's going to be costly. It's going to be, dangerous, risky for American troops. But you could argue that it's worth it if we want to have any kind of influence on the world. And so now, the problem here is that there have been all these attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and in Syria. And in Iraq especially, the United States has started to strike back hard over the last week. That's in response to the 3 U.S. troops who were killed in Jordan. We're not going to strike back in Jordan because Jordanians are our friends. But the strikes against the outpost in Jordan where our people were is literally right on the Syrian border. And so the strikes actually came from Syria. So we've been striking back against the groups who were responsible, Kataib Hezbollah and the PMUs, Iranian-backed proxies. We've been striking back against them in Syria and Iraq. The strikes in Iraq have led to calls by some people in the Iraqi government for the United States to completely be expelled from Iraq. Now, as it stands right now, the United States is in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government. And we always have been. We've always had what's called a status of forces agreement with Iraq. And that is, that defines how many troops can be there, what their rules of engagement will be, whether or not they can be kicked out or, taken to court or something if they do, like massacre somebody or something like that. Right now, we still have a status of forces agreement with Iraq, but there have been calls from some factions of the Iraqi government for the United States to be expelled, to kick them out completely. Well, that resolution has not gone through, but the strikes that we've been making have led to increased calls for the United States to be kicked out. And of course, now why would some factions of the Iraqi government want to do that? Well, because some factions of the Iraqi government are 100% proxies controlled by Iran. Iran is Shia Muslim. The Iraqi government is by and large Shia Muslim. The northern part of Iraq, which is what they call Kurdistan, is a semi-autonomous region that's administered by the Kurds. And the Kurds are Sunni Muslim. ISIS is Sunni Muslim. So it gets very complex and thorny. The bottom line is the Shia-led Iraqi government is being influenced by the Shia Iranian government very heavily. And so they are pushing for the United States to be kicked out. Now, this is how Iran fights. They only fight through these proxy groups. And they do that so that they can have some plausible deniability, even though everybody knows it's Iran that's pushing the buttons on this. They're not fooling anyone at all, but from a political standpoint, they feel like they can say, "Oh, it's not us. It's we don't have anything to do with this," even though the weapons that are being used are from Iran. All of the forces that are attacking the United States and Israel are Iranian-backed. They're Iranian-funded. They receive money from Iran. I mean, everybody knows it, right? There are Iranian IRGC forces in Syria and Iraq all the time, as advisors, right? So obviously, this is Iran, okay? And it's not a real war. At least it's not a regional conflict, a global conflict, until, as I've always said, the principal players are actually fighting each other. And so far, we don't have that. We don't have the United States striking Iran. If Israel were to strike Iran, that would not necessarily mean an escalation to a global conflict, because in some sense, Israel is still a proxy of the United States. Now, so as I said, the Iranian-backed Iraqi officials are using recent airstrikes that just happened by the United States, and they're ongoing, targeting these Iranian-backed Iraqi militias to retroactively justify their calls for the U.S. to be expelled from Iraq. The thing is, those PMUs that we're striking in Iraq, those Iranian-backed militias, they don't have the right to be in Iraq. They are not there legally. But the United States is there legally. So the United States has every right to respond and defend itself against those attacks from the Iranian-backed militia groups. But the Iranian-backed militia groups don't have the right to be there attacking us in the first place. So it's kind of a difficult argument for these factions of the Iraqi government to make when we literally have, it in writing that we have the right to be there. Now, as far as Yemen goes, the United States Central Command is continuing to strike the Houthis in Yemen. Over the last couple of days, there have been more anti-ship cruise missiles launched against commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. One of those missiles never even made it out of Yemen. It fell short and presumably blew up some camels or something. That's about all there is out there. But one of them actually hit a cargo ship. Now, I'm not sure what this tells us about these Houthi missiles that are being fired, that a anti-ship cruise missile struck a cargo ship in the Gulf of Aden, one of these enormous cargo carriers, and did virtually no damage. It did very little damage, and the ship was not significantly damaged in any way, and it continued on its way. What does that say about the quality of their missiles or about their skill at using the missiles they're being given? I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the fact that if you think about these gigantic cargo ships, I mean, here in Panama, we see them all the time at the Panama Canal, and they're massive. I mean, they're ginormous. And they, you have the ship itself, and then they stack these 40-foot shipping containers up like 10 or 12 or 15 high on the ship. And, they just look like a massive 10-story building floating through the canal. I would venture to say that if an anti-ship missile were to hit that stack of containers, it wouldn't actually damage very much except for the containers themselves. It wouldn't really damage the ship because you think about these containers, they're metal boxes and they're compartmentalized. And so they're stacked very tightly together. So if it blew up a few of those containers, they might destroy some Nike shoes or some Chinese junk that's being transported inside those containers. But as long as it's nothing like super flammable or anything like that, it's probably not going to damage the ship. That's my guess. I don't know. I don't know that much about what happened on that ship. But for a missile that's literally designed to kill a ship, to sink a ship, to strike a gigantic cargo vessel, and the vessel just sort of shrugs it off and keeps going, makes me think that must be the case. That must be why that happened, okay? Now, let's talk about, so we talked about Iraq and Syria. The United States continues to strike at these militias there. We've talked about the Houthis. The United States is still striking at the Houthi rebels. So this is why I say that I believe we're at war with Iran, because if Iran is, it's like they're subcontracting out the war to other, groups that they're funding. And simply saying, well, we're not really at war with Iran because we're not striking inside Iran. Well, Iran's not fighting. You could say then that Ukraine is not at war with Russia because they're not striking a whole lot inside Russian territory, although they are now. But before, of course they were at war with Russia. Russia was in their country. This is a little different because it's not Iranian troops. Now, Iran has 500,000 troops in their army. Now, they're probably not very well trained. They're probably not very well equipped. They're certainly not very well led. But they have 500,000 troops under arms, and the United States only has like 400 and something thousand under arms. So they have a very big army, but they don't have like the tanks and trucks and things like that it would take to move those troops, say, to Israel. And to do that, they'd have to cross Iraq and Jordan, and that's not going to go well if they try that. So Iran's strategy for fighting war, and Iran knows if it went up directly against Israel or the United States, they're going to lose. They're going to lose. Even though Iran has a huge number of troops, Iranian troops are much better equipped and much better trained and much better motivated. And so if they went head-to-head on the ground...
I think you lost sound.
Oh, somebody said I lost sound. Can you hear me? I'm showing that I've got audio.
You're froze up now.
It froze up.
There you go.
Okay, I'm back. I guess we had a glitch in the internet. Okay. I think that might have been yours, honey, because everybody's saying that it's fine. Okay, yeah. Dan says I'm good. So if the United States is fighting the subcontractors of Iran, and that's the way Iran is choosing to prosecute this war, then I would say we're at war with Iran. And the fact that we're fighting their subcontractors doesn't really mean anything, as far as the fact that we're at war with Iran. Oh, thank you for $10 for the monkeys. This is CBN though, so I don't get any of the donations that come to CBN, but I would highly recommend that you support CBN because that's how I keep my job. And if these lives are profitable for CBN, then I get to keep doing them. That's kind of the deal we have. So please go to cbn.com and support CBN. We really appreciate all of the support that we get, no matter how it comes, whether through YouTube or whether through cbn.com. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. We are donor supported. You can go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube, and you can subscribe over there and get a lot more of my opinion about some of these things. And I talk about a lot of other subjects, and you can see the monkeys over there. I have a couple of pet monkeys that we have here in Panama. You can also go to chuckholton.com and subscribe over there for all kinds of extra content. As a matter of fact, I'm about to put up one of the documentaries that I did that I think you will find very interesting. And that's going to be available only for subscribers at chuckholton.com. So you can go over there and subscribe and get access to a lot more content. So let's move on to Lebanon. Now, this is where things are really starting to ramp up. Iranian-backed militias, which include Hezbollah, Hamas, and some other very small, organizations, have continued to conduct attacks from southern Lebanon into Israel, and Israel has continued to respond. This is what I termed ping pong with missiles, as when I was there up in the north at the beginning of the war. And it's continued to go on. It seems to me, looking at the Shofar app that tracks these things, if you look at here, you see where it says confrontation line, confrontation line, confrontation line. That's all in the north, okay? So that's 23 hours ago up until 7 hours ago 2 hours ago. Those have been attacks on like Kiryat Shimona and that area from the north. So we still have missiles coming on basically a daily basis across from Lebanon into Israel. On the other hand, the rockets coming out of Gaza, if we look here where it says Gaza envelope, that was yesterday. We had one. Let's see if we have any more. See, that's all confrontation line. So that's all in the north. North, 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 north. Look at all those rockets coming from the north. Okay. Another one, Gaza envelope. That was on the 30th of January. So there have basically been 2 attacks from Gaza since the 30th of January. That is down dramatically. As a matter of fact, the Israelis estimate that they have either destroyed or had fired at them all of Hamas's missiles except for maybe 1,000. They only have maybe 1,000 of them left. They had something like 25,000 to 50,000 at the beginning, and they have fired, far more than 10,000 missiles and rockets at Israel since October 7th. But now they are almost out. Most of them have been found and destroyed, or they've already fired them off. And they are not getting resupplied from Iran. They're a little occupied fighting the Israelis that are in Gaza right now, so it's kind of hard for them to make more missiles. A lot of them were homemade. And so they, Gaza is much less of a threat to Israel now than it was at the beginning. So that shows that Israel is being successful at reducing the military capability of Hamas. They have not accomplished their goal to completely wipe out Hamas. And they are still, as a matter of fact, they had to start a new operation in the northern part of the Gaza Strip just a few days ago because they had a bunch of Hamas fighters that infiltrated into an area that had already been cleared. And so there were some operations that were happening. Thank you, Daniel. Operations that were happening inside the northern part of the Gaza Strip where there hadn't been before. And this is one of the things with these tunnels that just makes this so hard, is that they clear an area, they think it's clear, and pretty soon here comes more Hamas fighters underground, and they pop up, and now they've got a problem again. They are also heavily engaged in the south. They have mostly secured Khan Yunis to the point where things are quite a bit safer in Khan Yunis now, and they're moving. The IDF is moving south into Rafah, the area, the furthest south area in the Gaza Strip. But the Israelis are not anywhere near rescuing any of their hostages or wiping out all the leadership of Hamas just yet. However, there were still something like 200,000 people that had stayed in the north. This is Palestinians who had decided to stay in the north, even though they had been told many times to leave. They had been they tried to move them out, and they just said, nope, not leaving. Now, why would they do that? Well, I get it. If you're Palestinian and your house is up there, you are going to be afraid that if you leave, you're going to come back in 6 months and somebody else is going to be living in your house, or somebody will have pilfered through your stuff and stolen everything. So there are a lot of people who just didn't want to leave, and they were like, look, we're just going to stay here. And, you know, there were some people that were actually Hamas fighters that they know, without a doubt, this is not conjecture, that there were thousands of Hamas fighters that were hiding in the safe zones and are hiding in the safe zones that had been set aside by Israel, where Israel said, we're not going to attack these areas. So if you're a civilian and you have to be here, you've got to live in these areas over here so that you won't get killed. And so a lot of the fighters put on civilian clothes, went over there to those areas and stayed in those areas. So what Israel started to do is, just recently, they started to go through these safe zones in the north and say, okay, we are now forcing everyone to leave. Everyone has to leave the north. You are now leaving. And they surrounded these safe zones, and they started checking every single person as they were kicking them out, as they were leaving. And guess what? They found like 700 Hamas fighters, that they were known fighters, people that they knew. They captured like 70 high-ranking Hamas leaders that had been hiding out in these areas. And so it actually was a very successful operation for the IDF to do that. You can bet that they're going to be continuing to do that in Khan Yunis and other places further south. And so they are making progress in Gaza, but they're not anywhere near done. And the fear is that the United States and others will put enough pressure on Israel to stop the fighting before they actually get a chance to finish all this. A lot of people have been asking also about whether or not they're still flooding the tunnels in Gaza. Yes, they are. I did get confirmation on that. They are, from my friend Doron Kedar. They are still flooding the tunnels, and they've moved that operation into the south. So they're flooding tunnels in Khan Yunis. And this is good. This is a really good thing because that is where the top leaders like Yahya Sinwar are hiding out in tunnels, they believe, in the southern part of Gaza. So if they can slowly fill those tunnels with seawater, those guys will have one of two options. They will either get out of the tunnels and get caught or killed, or they will drown. That's going to be their options. And what about the Christian church in the northern part of Gaza? Judy says, as far as I know, they are forcing them to leave there now and sending them south. They're forcing the civilians out of the north and saying, you cannot stay here anymore. We're not going to put up with it for the time being. There are no services in the north. The northern part of Gaza is pretty much has been turned into a parking lot. And so it's just all rubble. If you've seen some of the pictures coming out of there, it's just mind-boggling what a wreck that place is. So there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's no services, there's no gas, there's no, and so the people who are there are literally being supported by the IDF. They're getting their food, they're getting their medical care, they're getting their drinking water from the IDF, and the IDF is saying, we're not going to do this anymore. You guys are leaving. You're going south. So, yeah, I don't know if Yahya Sinwar has left. I don't think he has. That's just a guess. But I've not heard any rumors or anything that Yahya Sinwar has fled Gaza. It would not be good for the morale of his troops if he took off and, say, went to Qatar or someplace like that. And there's really no place where he can be safe. Now, let's turn our attention to the West Bank and Judea and Samaria. The Al-Aqsa Martyr Battalion in Shechem, which is Nablus, Tulkarm, Tubas, have attacked Israeli forces over the last couple of days as the Israeli forces have continued to make raids into the West Bank. So they have, as you know, probably, they've arrested more than 3,000 people since the 7th of October in the West Bank on either proof or on suspicion of being, of assisting, facilitating, or supporting the terrorist groups. They've found a whole lot of actual Hamas fighters in the West Bank. They've taken literally thousands of weapons and hundreds of pounds of explosives, suicide vests, IEDs, rocket launchers, mortars, all kinds of weaponry out of the West Bank. So you could make a case that this whole thing has been a real cleansing time for Israel because they have severely degraded the capability of the people who hate them to do them harm. Except for in the north, and that's the real question. The IDF has moved 60,000 troops, more troops to the north. So they already had probably, I don't know, 100,000 troops up there to begin with since the beginning of the war. But they've moved another 60,000 troops to the northern border. And if you try to read between the lines there, that means that they have either made plans to go into Lebanon and take the fight to Hezbollah and do to Hezbollah what they've done to Gaza, or they're just simply saying we're going to refit and let these guys go up there. They have a lot of training areas up in the north. We're going to let them go up there and train and get ready. Philip asks, flooding the tunnels, and what about the hostages? They know that the hostages are being they're being held in the tunnels as human shields around the top leadership of Hamas. And so if they flood the tunnels, I think what they're hoping is that the leadership is going to come out of the tunnels and they'll take the hostages with them as human shields. They're not going to leave the hostages down there to drown, because then they lose the value of those hostages as human shields. Okay? So Yeah, somebody says the Israeli general was saying the conscripts are poorly trained and not ready. They are doing a lot of training in the north, up in the Golan Heights. As I've driven around up there, you can hear live fire training going on day and night up there. So they're working very hard to get these guys trained. They do have a lot of soldiers who are very combat hardened now because they've been fighting in Gaza for literally months. And so what they're doing is they're rotating some of those guys out, and they are moving those combat proven soldiers into training slots where they're training the conscripts and telling them, all right, guys, here's what we've been facing in Gaza. Here's what you need to understand about fighting Hamas. And they're transferring that knowledge to these conscripts over there. We also have U.S. advisors in Israel who are assisting the Israelis on that note as far as training goes. MS Bowie says, question, and then doesn't ask a question. So I can't answer your question, MS Bowie, because I'm thinking really hard, and I'm sorry, I just can't. It's not coming to me. I don't know what your question is. So if you have a question, it might be helpful to actually write it down there instead of just saying question. Okay, I'm just giving you a hard time. Are the Israel guys okay? Yes, they are okay, and I do talk to them on a regular basis. The guys from Ha Yovel are working hard, and they're doing a lot of really good stuff. How quickly are they flooding the tunnels? Saxon Anglo says, yes, they are not. They are flooding them faster because of the equipment that they obtained and the help that they obtained from Eric Prince, but not so fast that the people couldn't get out. So they're flooding. You know, it's not like it's going to flood in a matter of minutes. The water's just going to come up and up and up over a matter of days, and so what it'll do is that salt water will ruin anything that's being stored in the tunnels, like rockets and weapons and explosives and stuff like that, and they'll make the tunnels unlivable. So, all right, so we were talking, Jesus followers asking, how are things in Judea and Samaria? We were talking about that. They are very hot. It's the IDF is still doing missions on a daily basis into the West Bank. And when they do that, they are being attacked by organized resistance from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. And these are organized military units of Palestinians who they're not throwing rocks. They are attacking with RPGs and AK-47s. And so things are pretty hot down there. But I think now this is a conjecture on my part, but just from having watched things unfold in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, over the course of this war, I get the sense that the Palestinian Authority does not actually want war, like outright war with Israel, because they know they would lose. They have a whole lot more to lose by going to war directly with Israel than they have to gain. And so they are going to continue to try to show support for Hamas by, random terror attacks, ramming attacks. They saw some of those. We've seen some shooting attacks, against civilians and military from the IDF. But I don't think we're going to see like hundreds of thousands of Palestinians marching on Israel and, trying to foment another October 7th, because now Israel's on high alert. And the only thing that allowed October 7th to be so tragic for the Israelis and so successful for the Palestinians was hubris on the part of the Israelis, I believe. The fact that the Israelis literally believed that Hamas wasn't capable of that and would not believe the proof that was being given to them that Hamas was not only capable of it, but was planning to do it. And, they had not only the wherewithal, but they had the inclination, and they were planning it. And so that arrogance on the part of the Israeli leadership said, Hamas, like, they can't do that. And yet they could, and they did. But now Israel and their leadership is awake, they are mobilized, and they're motivated to keep this from happening again. And so this is not a good time for the Palestinian Authority or the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade to actually go to war directly, go hard against Israel. I don't think we're going to see that escalate a lot further. Now, I have been wrong before, and I'm always hesitant to make predictions when it comes to wars, because if there's anything I've learned in 20 years of covering wars and disasters, is that the whole concept of a war is that it is by definition a totally chaotic and uncontrollable environment. And there are so many factors that can affect a war that we just don't know. We just don't know. But what they are trying to do with the help of Iran, which again is at war not just with Israel but with the United States, is not to fight against us militarily, because they would lose. It's to do two things: to erode the will of the Israeli and the American people to sustain these operations. The same way they're looking at the lessons that have been shown for all the world in Ukraine. That the United States is very powerful and can do anything it puts its mind to, but it has the attention span of a fruit fly. And so in Ukraine, we said, this is worth getting behind. This is worth supporting. We are 100% behind Ukraine, and we're going to give them what they need to win. And then when it goes on for a couple of years, the Americans start going, oh, it's too much money, and why are we doing this? And bioweapons labs, and we, instead of being, living up to our commitments that we made at the beginning, we as an American people are by and large saying, well, we're not, we might have been in for a penny, but we're certainly not in for a pound. And so let's just pull out. Let's just declare it over. And in which case, that brings about the worst possible outcome. We don't just lose the conflict, but we spend absolutely profane amounts of money to win and then lose. And we don't lose because the enemy defeats us. We lose because we defeat ourselves, because we just don't have the attention span and the political will to stick it out when things get tough. We're, as a people, the United States is non-committal. They're just like, we're far too divided as a people. It's like there's two countries living in America, and we just spend so much time fighting each other that we can't make a decision. We can't stick with anything long enough to actually have a good outcome when it comes to geopolitics. That's really unfortunate, because it emboldens our enemies and it discourages our allies. And like the lioness says, why do we even get involved? Well, going back to what I said at the beginning, the reason we get involved is because we want to have a say in how the world works. If if we don't want to have any say in how the world works, then guess who sets the rules for the global order? Our enemies, China and Russia and Iran, are going to be setting the rules for how things work in the world. Do you want to live in a world where China, Russia, and Iran set the rules? I don't. So, although, I mean, war is always about choosing the lesser of two bad options. That is war, okay? So Crazy Diamond says, Ukraine was not our conflict. We need to take care of America first, okay? Crazy Diamond is trying to make the point that we can't do two things at once. Our country is not capable of addressing the border conflict and being involved in anything overseas, any kind of geopolitics globally. Like, we're not a big enough country. We're not a powerful enough country to be able to do two things at once. The only thing we can possibly do is focus on just the border. Is that what you're saying, Crazy Diamond? Because I would disagree. I would say that we can do two things at once. We can do more than two things at once. And in fact, do you want America to be known and respected and even feared by our enemies? Or do you want America to be the laughing stock of the globe? These are the choices that we have to make here when it comes to being involved in things overseas. This is why, look, they're not good choices. I get it. It's expensive. We don't have the money, okay? It's like, you're already broke and your car breaks down so you can't get to work. Somehow, you're going to have to figure out a way to find the money to fix your car so that you can go to work and make the money to pay the other bills. Sometimes in life, we just have bad choices, and we have to make the best of bad choices. And that's where America is with the global order. And I would say to you that, yes, we need to address the problem on the U.S. southern border, because it is literally costing us almost $500 billion over the last 3 years since Biden has become president. The number of illegals in the United States amounts to about 10% of our entire population, and those illegals have cost American taxpayers up to $500 billion, $500 billion. So the idea, and by the way, Trump only wanted $11 billion to finish the wall, okay? So if we were to address the southern border, we would have an extra $500 billion to do something else with, and that'd be great. Now, on top of that, in addition to that, now here's my question. I would wonder so I'm not picking on you. I'm trying to answer your assertion, okay, here, that we can only do one thing or the other, okay? Or like the lioness, like, why do we even get involved? I'm not, Crazy Diamond, I'm not attacking you. Don't hear me, attacking you, but I'm trying to help you think through this. Like, what are the second and third order effects of us pulling out of Ukraine now that we've spent $100 billion there? We could go back and armchair quarterback whether or not we should have gotten involved to begin with. Again, I would go back and say, either we live up to our commitments to NATO or we don't. And if we don't, then America has zero respect and zero influence on what happens across the globe. We don't even get to set the rules of the game, much less win the game. And that means we will lose the game because our enemies will be setting the rules. Okay, that's my point. I would ask you, Crazy Diamond, off the top of your head, do you have any idea what the United States GDP is? What's the global, the gross domestic product of the United States? So what would you say that is? This is annually, okay? What is the U.S. GDP? Anybody, do you know? Do you know? And people are saying, we don't have any money. Well, the United States actually has a lot of money. We just don't use it very wisely, and we spend more than we have. But the U.S. GDP is $23 trillion at the moment, per year. $23 trillion, okay? Now, how much of that does the United States take in taxes? Let's see, it is about $5 trillion a year. Trillion, 5 trillion. So, if we do the math, our commitment to Ukraine has run about 1% of our annual tax receipts. About 1% of our annual tax receipts. Now, you could say it doesn't, that the war in Ukraine doesn't matter to me, so I don't care if Russia takes over Ukraine. But there are some good reasons, and I've made this case before, why spending that money in Ukraine will actually save us money in the future. Take this, for example. The U.S. military spends what's the U.S. military budget? Do you know? Do you know how much the U.S. military gets given each year by the federal government? In the last year, it's just about $900 billion. $900 billion. Now, we've spent about $100 billion in Ukraine over 2.5 years. Okay, so, but let's just say 2 years, so that's $50 billion a year or something like that. So $50 billion as a percentage of $900 billion is a pretty small number. And we could do some research and find out how much it's estimated that the Pentagon wastes each year. And so, according to a 2019 Pentagon Commission study, the Pentagon wasted $125 billion over 5 years. Last year, the Pentagon failed its 6th annual audit and failed to account for its $3.8 trillion in assets. The Pentagon's assets are vast and decentralized, and so they're getting nearly 900. The Defense Appropriations Act for this year is $831.7 billion in total funding. So the Pentagon can't even account for half of all the stuff it owns. But we know that the things that the Pentagon owns are made up of equipment, materiel, and ammunition. And that ammunition goes out of date. So over time, every year, the United States takes a literal mountain of ammo and dumps it in a big hole and burns it and just destroys it because it's past its sell-by date. Sometimes we give obsolete equipment to other countries like Colombia and stuff like that. And sometimes we sell it, right? So this is stuff that is literally billions of dollars. So at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we gave $3.8 billion worth of that old equipment that was about to go, to get destroyed or given away anyway. We gave it to Ukraine. That's part of the $100 billion that we've given them. We then gave the Pentagon $9 billion to replace the $3.8 billion that they'd given away. It's basically like telling your kids, go give your old toys, to some poor people, and we'll give you a lot better toys. So you could make the case that $3.8 billion really didn't cost America much, because that was money that had been spent long ago to make that equipment and ammo. And it was really about to just get blown up anyway. It was just going to get burned and destroyed or given away anyway. That happens every single year. When I was here in Panama for the invasion back in 1989-90, when we got done here, we came down here for the invasion after a month or two. When the invasion was over, we went to pack up to go home, and we had literally just truckloads of ammunition and explosives and rockets and mortars and all kinds of, just millions of dollars worth of stuff. And it was perfectly good. There was nothing wrong with it at all. But the problem is, with ammunition, every single round has to be accounted for if it gets turned back in to the arms room. And we had just hundreds of thousands of rounds, if not millions of rounds, that we had brought down for the invasion. And not just bullets, but again, grenades and rockets and all sorts of explosives and all kinds of stuff. And so rather than go through the hassle of turning all that stuff in and having to account, like actually make a spreadsheet for every single piece of equipment that was going to go back, we literally just dumped it all in a big hole and set it on fire here in Panama, out on Empire Range, and wasted millions of dollars of taxpayer money. That sort of thing happens all the time. All the time. And so it's part of the process. It's the way the system works. And so if we could take that stuff instead and give it to Ukraine, it's not really costing us much money. Now, the vast majority of the money that we have spent on the Ukraine war, of that $100 billion, has not gone to Ukraine. It's gone to American, like Boeing and DynCorp and American companies, to build equipment that then gets sent to Ukraine. Meaning that it's paying for American jobs, right? And yeah, the end result gets sent to Ukraine, but it is actually creating American jobs in the process. So I'm not saying that, look, you can argue that this whole thing was a bad idea. And there's an argument to be made for that. But I would argue that there's a whole lot of other things that we could be addressing that could save America more money than what we're spending on Ukraine. And we are getting some very valuable stuff from the war in Ukraine, namely reducing the capability of the Russian military by half, learning about the Russian military capabilities, things that we didn't know before, which will inform our decisions for how to spend our military's budget in the future, so we won't be wasting money on things that won't do any good, and developing new methods of warfare using the laboratory that is the Ukraine war, which will help the United States be more effective in the next war, okay? So John Nathan says Jesus was born in Palestine. No, Jesus was born in Israel. And Jesus was not a Palestinian. He was not a migrant. That's ridiculous liberal thought garbage. And that's all I have to say about that. Okay, so do we borrow money to pay for wars? Well, the lioness, money, as you know, is fungible, meaning that's like saying, if I help my son by paying for his apartment, am I actually buying him drugs? Well, if my son takes the money that he has, that he earns from his job working at Pizza Hut, and uses it to buy drugs because he doesn't need to use it to pay for his apartment, then indirectly I am buying my son drugs. I'm helping him, I'm facilitating his ability to buy drugs because money is fungible like that. So if the United States is borrowing money, we are bringing in, you know, $5, $6, $7 trillion a year, okay, through tax receipts and tariffs and things like that. $7 trillion a year, let's call it. So we have a lot of money, but we are spending more than that. And so it's hard to say, you know, let's say we're borrowing $1 trillion a year. It's hard to say where that $1 trillion of borrowed money is being spent, because is it that we're spending that money, that $1 trillion, on buying weapons for the military, or are we spending it on SNAP benefits for poor people in the United States, or unemployment benefits? It's hard to say. The bottom line is we're borrowing money. We're spending more money than we are taking in, and that should not be happening. The lioness says, no, I mean, are we borrowing money from China? Why? Well, the way the United States borrows money is it issues bonds, and then anybody can buy the bonds. So if China is buying the bonds or the U.S. currency, then yes, we're borrowing the money from China. If you buy the bonds, then we're borrowing the money from you. That's the way that works. Now, the question is not so much who is the money being borrowed from, it's how are we going to pay it back? And there will eventually come a time when we will not be able to pay back the money that we are borrowing, and it's getting there very quickly. That's another podcast for another day, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so let me just go back and sort of reiterate what this was all about. Number one, I'm saying we are at war with Iran. This war looks different than other wars. All wars look different than other wars. Every war has its own flavor. This war looks like Iran funding all the H's, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and the Hashishabi, or the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. And those people attacking us, or Israel, and us attacking those proxies in lieu of attacking Iran directly. How long that keeps up is anybody's guess. The bottom line is it cannot be very effective for us to be attacking the symptom and not the cause. What I mean is for us to be attacking the proxies and not the source of the war. And so we can strike these militias, these different umbrella groups, the Islamic resistance, the axis of resistance or whatever. We can strike them all we want, and it's not going to make that much of a difference. Those guys are killing Americans, and just yesterday they killed 6 of our allies, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, when an Iranian drone struck a training compound in northern Iraq. And so that's really bad. We've got 900 troops deployed in Syria still, and those guys are going to continue to be under threat as long as we don't do something more drastic to put a stop to it. And Iran, for its part, is developing its military strategy not around tanks and infantry and armor and artillery. It's developing its military strategy around very cheap drones and information war. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get the United States populace to pressure, because they don't understand how this works, to pressure the government to declare a halt to the war before it's over, just like we did in Afghanistan. And what that means is that we lose. That is exactly what losing looks like. The other thing they want to do is degrade the IDF and the United States by firing, okay, these drones, this is the last point I'll make, the drones that Iran is making and distributing to all the world, these drones, the Shahed drones, they have a range up to 2,500 miles, okay? They have a new one that's coming out that has a range up to 5,000 miles. And guess what? They're farming these, the building of these drones out to other countries. They're farming them out to Russia. They're farming them out to Venezuela. Did you hear what I said? People, listen up. If you're not listening, stop what you're doing, listening to what I'm saying right now. They are farming out the making of these kamikaze drones. And Ray Taylor says their drones are a joke. They're not a joke. I've been on the receiving end of these drones. They carry a 34-kilogram warhead, okay? 34 kilograms of explosive. How many pounds is that? 34 kilogram, 2 pounds is a 75-pound warhead. 75 pounds of explosives won't take out a city block, but it will take out a building, and you don't want to be in that building, okay? Now, they might be slow and easy to shoot down, but the bottom line is here, they don't even care if they actually hit their target. Actually, they would prefer that these drones don't hit a target inside Israel or inside Ukraine or anything like that. They would prefer that they get shot down. Why? Because the drone costs $20,000. The missile that shoots down the drone costs a couple $1 million. And that's their strategy. That's their secret strategy. They want to bleed us dry financially by shooting hundreds and hundreds of drones at Ukraine and Israel. And who's funding the anti-aircraft and anti-drone capability of these two wars? The United States, by and large. It's the US and Western Europe. And so every time they send a $20,000 drone over and we shoot it down with a $2 million missile, who won that engagement? Iran did. Iran won that engagement. And so that is their secret strategy. They're building these things all over the place, and they are building them right now in Venezuela. How far is Venezuela from the United States? Distance from Venezuela to the U.S. What? Okay, yeah, all right, I'm paying attention. It is, the shortest distance is 4,784 kilometers from Venezuela to the United States. That's 2,972 miles. What that means is, folks, if they build these drones with a 5,000 kilometer range, they could fire these drones from Venezuela into the United States. And we don't have anti-aircraft, anti-drone capabilities all over the United States. We don't have really any. They're very, basically no place. So these drones could be landing in if they wanted them to, they could be landing in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona. They are Iran has been developing Venezuela as another proxy force to strike against the U.S. I'm not saying that Venezuela is shortly going to be firing drones into the United States. They know better than that. But they could form their own proxies and fire them from ships offshore. Then that way they would have plausible deniability. There's a gigantic fleet of ghost ships that the Iranians are employing all over the globe to get mostly to get their oil out of Iran and over to China and stuff like that, over to Venezuela. But some of those ghost ships could easily fire several hundred of these Shahed drones against the United States with plausible deniability. And that may bring us into a direct war with Iran if that were to happen. But here's the crazy thing. This is crazy. There are at least 20 components in those drones that come from the United States, come from companies in the United States. They need parts from the U.S. to build those drones. Bombardier, the snowmobile manufacturer, they make snowmobiles and four-wheelers and stuff like that. Some of their parts are being used in these drones that are killing people right now in places like Ukraine. So this is a problem. This is a problem. And that's all I've got to say about that. And we need to pray. All right? I got to go. And so let's pray and we'll get out of here. Father God, we just come to you right now. We acknowledge your sovereignty over the globe, over this world. And thank you so much for that, because with that assurance, we don't have to be afraid of all these things that are happening around us. We can watch the chaos that's unfolding around the world, and we don't have to be afraid. And Lord, I pray that as we see things falling apart around us, even in our own country, in the United States, and in Australia, and in the UK, and in South Africa, and in Zimbabwe, and everywhere, as we see the world going to hell, I pray that instead of being worried, instead of tearing our hair out, instead of getting angry with each other, that we would look around and say, how can we be the hands and feet of Jesus in this time? You promise in your word that each one of us was born at the exact time and place where we are most likely to find God, and that you designed us so that we would do good works while we are here. And so I pray that we would be able to submit ourselves to you to the point that we are completely unafraid of what's going on around us, and people would see that fearlessness in us and want what we have. And we would be bold enough to share with them the reason for our faith, the reason for our fearlessness. And so, Lord, we pray for Israel, for peace in Jerusalem. We pray for peace in Ukraine and in Russia. We pray for peace in Sudan. We pray for peace in Burma. There's so many places around the globe that need your peace. And we pray, Lord, that we would all continue to be motivated to cry out to you, to bring peace, Father, and that you would bring it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, folks, thank you very much. I got to run. Love you guys. We'll see you later.